My name is Zainab Meborno from the University of Leicester. I'm still part of CTPSR as a visiting research fellow. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to welcome you all today to launch this very well, research project based on voices from ground zero, interrogating history, culture, and identity in the resolution of Cameroon's Anglophone conflict. As we know, Africa, there's always one cycle of conflict or another. So this is a project that was done by Gordon, Nancy, and some partners based in Cameroon. There's a lot here to be learned, and we're thinking perhaps these are lessons that could be passed on to shared in other areas, and perhaps to look at other cases of conflicts in Africa, for example, DRC, Nigeria, Sudan, and many other places. I also welcome those of you that are joining us virtually, so I'm not focusing only on the people that I have here. So without taking too much of your time, I'll now hand over to Dr. Gordon Crawford and Dr. Nancy Annan, all from CTPSR, to present their findings.
Thank you very much, Zainab. Thank you, Zainab, and good afternoon to all present, and good day to all of you online. Thanks for attending this launch of our report on Cameroon's Anglophone conflict, entitled Voices from Ground Zero. The report is freely available to download on the Centre's website. It's a multi-authored report, and Nancy and I are giving the presentation here today, but other members of our team are joining online from Cameroon and elsewhere, and hopefully will be able to contribute. So Cameroon's Anglophone conflict. This current conflict actually commenced in late 2016 when peaceful protesters were subjected to repression by the Cameroonian police and military. It then became an armed conflict from September 2017 onwards, so a year later, when armed separatist groups emerged to fight for an independent Republic of Ambazonia in the two English-speaking northwest and southwest regions, which constitutes the former British Southern Cameroons, as the English-speaking regions as indicated on the map here. And this conflict is a highly neglected one globally, and it remains ongoing to date. But there's a long history to this current conflict, and its historical roots are in the colonial period as well as in the post-independence period. And these historical roots are covered in chapter 2 of the report. And we cover the German colonial period, then post-World War I, the division of German Cameroon between the French and British colonial powers, and their rule formerly under the League of Nations and then the United Nations, until reunification of both parts at independence in 1961. Then post-independence, two key events contributed to the marginalisation within Cameroon of the minority English-speaking population. First, the abolition of the federal constitution by President Adidjo in 1972, thereby removing the relative autonomy of English-speaking West Cameroon as it was at that time. Secondly, the renaming of the country by President Biya in 1984, and this presidential decree changed the name from the United Republic of Cameroon to La République du Cameroun. In other words, returning to the same name given to French Cameroon at its independence in 1960, before reunification in 1961 with Southern Cameroons. So it can be argued that this abrogated the reunification agreement and reaffirmed the statehood of La République du Cameroun with no regard for the territory that was formerly British Southern Cameroons. So these events led to the rise of Anglophone opposition to the dominant Francophone state, especially with political liberalisation in the 1990s, indicated by the two very large all Anglophone conferences that were held in 1993 and 1994. And the main demand here was for the restoration of the 1961 Federation, but secessionist voices also emerged at that time, especially in 1994, with the failure of the government to heed the demands for a return to federalism. However, opposition rose and fell again until the contemporary period. And chapter 3 then looks at the contemporary events that led to the current armed conflict. In recent years, there were rising grievances. In recent years, there were rising grievances amongst the Anglophone population, especially in relation to the distinctive legal and education systems that were being undermined by the appointment of French-speaking judges and teachers. These resulted in peaceful protests, first by lawyers, then by teachers in late 2016. These were brutally repressed by state forces, and more widespread civil disobedience followed, including the weekly ghost town days, where everything was shut down in the two Anglophone regions, a general strike as such. These general strikes were led by the Cameroon Anglophone Civil Society Consortium, who were advocating a return to federalism. The government responded with more repression. In January 2017, the consortium was banned, its leaders imprisoned or fled into exile. There was a 2-month internet shutdown, and a significant consequence of such state repression was that secessionist voices then took center stage, followed by the emergence of armed separatist groups. On the 1st of October 2017, the anniversary of independence from British rule in 1961, the independent Republic of Ambazonia was declared, alongside demonstrations by over 1 million people, in which 17 demonstrators were killed. The first attacks on the Cameroon security forces followed, and armed conflict has been ongoing to date. So without going into the number of deaths and numbers of people displaced since then, we can say that this is a highly neglected conflict which has had a severe impact on the Anglophone population. So we were fortunate to get an urgency grant from the UK's Arts and Humanities Research Council to investigate the experiences of civilians from Ground Zero, which is the name given locally to the conflict zones. And as well as Nancy and myself, as I said at the start, the team comprises a very strong group of Cameroonian academic and civil society partners, some of which are with us online today. We've worked as a team throughout, and indeed the Cameroonian colleagues undertook all the field work, all the data collection, as we were unable to travel at that time due to the pandemic. So the partners are listed on the slide here. Our objectives were threefold, as noted on the left-hand side of the slide, to document the experiences of Anglophone citizens most affected by the conflict, to enable their hitherto excluded voices to contribute to local and national dialogues on conflict resolution, and also to understand and explain their perspectives within the historical context of colonialism and post-colonialism. And I hope that this report contributes to the realization of all three objectives. Let me now hand over to Nancy.
Yeah, thank you very much, God, and hello, everyone. So with regards to the methodology, the research was mainly qualitative, inclusive of participatory creative art-based methods such as collage making. And in Cameroon, we felt that collage making was an important additional research method to use, given the fragility in the context and how people were afraid. So in order to avoid possible reprisal, creative art-based method became one of an additional method that we use. So in general, we conducted 8 focus group discussions which we 4 with internally displaced persons in Douala and in Yaoundé, and 4 with residents in the conflict-affected communities in the northwest and southwest regions. And these are the Anglophone regions that we've in the country. And then we also did 4 collage making sessions involving 60 IDPs in the Anglophone regions. We also conducted 38 semi-structured interviews with community leaders in affected regions, historical archival work to collate and analyze the historical roots of the conflict. We also organized a consultative workshop with NGOs who contributed additional information as well as validated our preliminary findings. In addition, we organized workshops with policymakers and diplomats to share our findings, but also to discuss some of the work that international actors were doing in addressing the conflict in Cameroon. The conflict has affected civilians in diverse ways. There has been increasing brutality with civilians subjected to extreme forms of violence, including summary execution, injuries, arbitrary arrest, detention, torture, rape, as well as the burning of houses, healthcare centers, and schools. Participants shared their experiences of how sometimes they are randomly stopped by the military and arrested for no reason at all, or other than being falsely accused of being a terrorist or being suspected of working with the armed separatists. And so these kind of atrocities also caused sort of fear and trauma within local population, and participants also lamented about the increasing kidnapping cases. In 2019, for example, 170 school children were kidnapped in one of the communities in the southwest regions. And some of these kidnappers, and most of them are both the military and the armed separatists, and they use it as a means to extort money from them. Some of them ask as much as 2.5 million francs, which is like 3,200 pounds. And for people in such communities, these are money that is difficult to come by, or they cannot even afford it. So unfortunately, some of these victims end up being killed in the process. And then there is also the increase in sexual violence. Sexual violence has become rampant and pervasive, including rape and mass rape, which are used as weapons of war in this conflict. There's also human rights violations have become pervasive, flagrant, and committed with impunity. IDPs that we interacted with talked about the fact that they feel abandoned, and many have not received support, particularly from the state. And so it's become difficult for them. And those that are in the Francophone areas and that are hosted by the Francophone communities also talked about discrimination with regards to housing, with regards to education and jobs in such communities. Access to farmlands have become also difficult. Livelihoods and income have been affected in the region due to the rising violence and insecurities. Poverty is on the increase, and young women or young girls who have no means of income are being forced into prostitution or sex for survival. There is also the breakdown of social cohesion with increasing mistrust and suspicion and division within communities. And this is often linked to the phenomenon called the black legs, where civilians have been accused of selling information to either warring factions, and that has created some sort of suspicion within the communities. Crimes and insecurities are on the increase, including what the phenomenon called the fake ambers, and these fake ambers are some local criminals who are, using the opportunity to extort and to loot houses and homes in the name of the real ambers. There is also the development of the war economy. And we've seen that in many African countries, in the DRC, in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, where war has become a means for profits, for business by these warring factions. And in Cameroon, it was not an exception. The kidnapping for ransom is a case in point. And evidence of our research demonstrate that these atrocities are committed both by both warring factions, but majority by the military. So with such impact on the civilians, what are some of the strategies for peace? Our chapter 5 of this report, we looked at some of the strategies for conflict resolution, and with our research highlighted that it highlighted at least the following pathways to peace: ceasefire and military withdrawal, inclusive dialogue, language equality and bilingualism, bottom-up approaches, mediation and negotiation, secession, and federation. Ceasefire, for instance, was noted to be a very important first step in finding solution to the conflict, because a majority of the participants felt that there's the need to silence the gun, with both warring parties putting down their weapons before any initiative for peace can be achieved. As noted on the slide, if we can silence the gun, we can talk peace, we can talk some sense and change mindset gradually to peace building. So they believe the ceasefire is an important first step. And linked to that also is the need for military withdrawal. And this was linked to the fact that in 2017, the government deployed its elite multidimensional force called the Rapid Intervention Battalion, which has controlled the Anglophone region since that time. And for many participants, they noted that if peace is to be given a chance, or if there's any opportunity for dialogue, then there's a need to demilitarize the region before such initiative can begin. There were another strategy for peace was inclusive dialogue, which participants felt is very important key step. It leads to they noted that a real, genuine and inclusive national dialogue, which brings all the stakeholders to the table, is crucial step towards peace. Many participants questioned in 2019, the government organized a major national dialogue, and this dialogue was criticized mainly to be exclusive, alienating different actors such as the separatists and civil society organizations and women groups. So many of the research participants noted that it is important to organize an inclusive dialogue that brings together all the different stakeholders, so that it will be a good first step towards peace. Another strategy that participants highlighted was the bottom-up approach. They noted that it is important for decision-making, particularly with regards to the peace process, to take a bottom-up rather than a top-down elitist approach, so that local population can be involved in the process. They also recommended a political solution, and these are twofold. The secession, the majority of the participants were calling for secession because they believe that they feel marginalized and they are tired of how the Francophones have been treating them. And they believe that if the root causes of the conflict is not really addressed and the status quo is maintained, then it can lead to more conflict in the future. So the majority of them recommended for a secession. But there were others also that recommended for federal system, a return to the federal system, as Gordon initially mentioned, so that all the 10 regions in the country can then have some social, economic, and political autonomy in some way or form. Another strategy that we identified was language equality and bilingualism. And this was key because the majority of the participants also mentioned that language is the source of, is one of the major causes of the conflict, because a lot of the socioeconomic marginalization has been built or depended on the language. The ability to either speak French or not has been used to deprive them of certain opportunities. So they indicated that there's a need for everybody to learn French and English, and each language given equal respect and equal respect within the country, so that it will be treated equally, because at the moment English is not treated equally, and this is affecting the socioeconomic opportunities of the Anglophones in the country. Another strategy was mediation and negotiation, and they noted that there's a need for a third-party mediation, which would include maybe the UN, the AU, and other international community actors such as the US, UK, and France. Peace negotiation, they noted that in addition to the United Nations leading, there is also the need to identify neutral persons or entities such as, you know, former president with credible standing to be part of such peace negotiation. I'll end your recording.
Thank you, Nancy. So a range of strategies for peace have been outlined by our research participants, and local CSOs are also very active in peace campaigns. And certainly research participants overwhelmingly expressed a desire for peace, though not peace on any terms. Rather, it's a desire for peace with justice, be it through federation or independence. But currently there are major challenges to achieving conflict resolution. There is currently an impasse. War continues on a daily basis. There are no peace negotiations as far as we are aware. Any external attempts at bringing the warring parties together have hit a brick wall. The government of Cameroon appears an intent on a military solution and shows little or no interest in a political solution. There are divisions within the Ambazonian movement. The so-called Swiss peace initiative by the Swiss government has made no progress. Also, international pressure is virtually absent. Most Western governments prioritize other interests, including trade and geopolitical interests when it comes to Cameroon. They're reluctant to criticize the Cameroon government. President Macron's recent visit was an example where the Anglophone conflict did not even seem to make it onto the agenda. And looming above all this is President Paul Biya's age, currently the longest serving president on the African continent, and the question of his succession. But as one colleague put it, we cannot simply wait for Biya to die before efforts are made to resolve this conflict. Finally, the report contains some recommendations. A few of the key ones are: first, for all parties to listen to the voices of affected civilians. Their voices have been ignored, and we hope to contribute with this report to their voices being heard. Second, there is a need for genuine and inclusive dialogue as part of peace negotiations, with international mediation to facilitate such negotiations. Third, such dialogue and negotiations to include the representatives of affected communities. In other words, the voices that we have attempted to highlight. Fourthly, a peace agreement will almost certainly need to include a referendum amongst the Anglophone population in order to determine the political future of the English-speaking regions. And finally, post-conflict, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee will be needed to deal with the atrocities and human rights abuses that have occurred, including sexual violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon and Nancy. So I'll now invite Dr. Manu Lekunze from the University of Aberdeen.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Gordon and James for inviting me to be the discussant for this very important report. You've done clearly an excellent job in capturing and recording the voices of people who would have otherwise perhaps not be heard. So great job, and impartial account from academics, not politicians or NGOs with political agendas, is an important resource that people like me will use and reference for many years to come. So thank you very much for doing this. I guess my role as a discussant is to provide critical comments on the report. So I'll do just that, but I'll do my comments in the form of questions. So kind of questions where really it's for all of us to reflect, for you in particular to reflect on, and for all of us to reflect and see how we problematize the thinking around this conflict. So I think my first comment is about new information. So what do you think is new? Some of us or people might say that the report contains mostly information that we already know. Why a report? What does it do? I'll leave that for now, but go to a more substantive point that I would like to raise, which is about the word marginalization. That's my second point. Marginalization has become more or less a Cameroonian word. It is ubiquitous in the public discourse on the Anglophone problem in Cameroon. It's quite ubiquitous in your report as well. But I would want to ask, what is marginalization in the Cameroonian context? I know you have provided a chapter that talks about the different types of marginalization, but I'm very interested in the mechanics of marginalization. How does it work? Who is marginalized? Who is doing the marginalizing? If you were to answer and say that, yes, it's the government that is doing the marginalizing, okay, let me be a little bit more provocative in posing the question in a different way. Cameroon is very much well known for creating so many different ministries on all sorts of things, that some that are important, some that are not important. Which ministry in Cameroon holds the marginalization portfolio? Where is the Ministry of Marginalization? Who is the Minister of Marginalization? For those who say, yes, it's BIA, it comes from the presidency. Where is the ministre délégué à la présidence de la République chargé de la marginalisation? Where are the soutraits instructions du chef d'État, memos that Cameroon is quite familiar with these days? I think these are questions designed to make people think about the things that we think we know about this conflict, so that we can begin to think about how to fix whatever is going on. But I have a theory about how I think marginalization works in Cameroon, which I want to put forward to you so that we can reflect over it. I believe that Cameroon is governed through a personal regime. Such regimes generally use trust, not competence, as the criteria for recruitment for ministerial positions. I'm responding to what you refer to as political marginalization in your report. Family and ethnic ties play an important role in trust. In effect, at the government's core in Cameroon is President Biya's family members and friends who have become like family. In the immediate outer layer are people from Biya's village, an ethnic group, then groups near Biya or near Biya's ethnic group, and so forth. As you expand outwards, all the important ministerial positions are filled by the time you get to Wum, Akwaya, Ekondo Titi, in the northwest and southwest regions. In fact, one could argue that the spatial status of the Northwest and the Southwest regions, because of their separate history that you have eloquently outlined, has helped the Anglophones to occupy political positions that they would not otherwise occupy in a purely neo-patrimonial Cameroon. On economic marginalization, which again you have written quite clearly in your report, I want to point out the fact that political marginalization and economic marginalization are linked. Cameroon is an underdeveloped economy where a rentier government is the dominant economic actor. In such economies, political power is closely linked with economic means. Once you are excluded from political power, you struggle economically. It's the basic logic. Let me use an important example that is at the core of this ongoing crisis to demonstrate my point. And I'm talking about the teachers and the magistrates or lawyers strike. Now, Cameroon recruits teachers and magistrates through what they call concours or entrance examinations into higher institutes. Due to the high level of nepotism and corruption in Cameroon, those with political connections or money to purchase space in these schools are likely to pass the exams than those who are competent. Over time, the number of trained teachers and magistrates reflect those with political power and money. In effect, people from whom acquire Ikondo Titi or Kumbo who are already excluded from political and economic power will be underrepresented in the teachers and magistrate pool in Cameroon. Therefore, it's no surprise to me that you will find a chemistry teacher in government high school, Ikondo Titi, who does not speak English. My theory, unfortunately, concludes that the marginalization of the Anglophones in Cameroon, it's a product of the nature of government in Cameroon as a whole. This is not to deny people's personal experiences and how they interpret their experiences. However, we will need to look far more carefully to what is the cause of the problem before we can begin to propose what could fix the problem. And that leads to my final comment and question. One of your recommendations, of course, is about dialogue. Again, with regards to this crisis, the word dialogue has become ubiquitous. Everybody has called for dialogue. Yes, dialogue is a positive word that makes people feel good that they are making contributions to resolve the conflict peacefully. But again, let me problematize dialogue and say, if the problem is actually from the nature of government in Cameroon as a whole, how do you think dialogue between the government, the current government, or even future similar governments, and the Anglophones, who are a subset of Cameroon, could resolve a problem that is fundamentally about the government of the whole country? I will end here and hope my problematization of the two words marginalization and dialogue, which are very common in the discussion or the discourse of this conflict, has given us some food for thought. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Manu. Very interesting and indeed thought-provoking questions. I'll hand over to Gordon and Nancy to respond.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Manu. Indeed, very thought-provoking questions. And Thank you for highlighting the different institutions. Perhaps we cannot be able to do that here. And these are really interesting and wide questions. But again, what I can say with regards to what new, and again, I will say something, and maybe our partners online can also add a few if they have any additional inputs. With regards to new information, and I agree with you, you can say that it's everything has been written about with this information that we know, but I think that the originality of our work and the information that we've gathered is linked to the fact that it is written or is focuses on the authentic voices of those that are affected. So we include a lot of the quotes of the affected communities so as to have their voices heard, because oftentimes we do research and it is written and said in the voices of those doing the research, but you hardly hear the voices of those affected. And I think that what is key for us doing this research was to focus on the voices of those affected so that it will be heard. And I think that that brings in a new dynamic to how we have actually collated and reported about the information or the issues that is on the ground in Cameroon. With regards to marginalization, I agree with you that perhaps we didn't go into details with regards to the mechanics of marginalization in the report, but I think that our report highlights some of the experiences of the people and how the marginalization manifests itself in the Cameroon case. I mean, we have some of them sharing experiences such as, you have graduates, two people will graduate from the same university, and you have instances where if a Francophone will be given a better job than an Anglophone, even though they have the same qualification, access to official documentation and are easier for Francophone than it is for Anglophone. And again, you mentioned about the issues of a teacher in one of the communities in Anglophone region who cannot even speak English, yet alone teach the English, the students, and give them proper teaching because they are Francophones with no English qualification. And this is a problem because it affects the quality of education within that region, which in turn affects their employability and economic opportunities in the future. So that's sort of lead to the cycle of marginalization over and over again. But we agree to your point that perhaps we could have delved deeper into the mechanics of marginalization. Thank you so much for your constructive feedback.
Yes, thank you very much, Manu. Very perceptive and relevant comments, and we take them on board. I think just to add a little to what Nancy said in terms of the concept of marginalization, maybe its ubiquitous nature does mean that we took it for granted somewhat, or certainly we looked at the various forms of marginalization without analyzing the mechanics. And clearly there's no ministry for marginalization, but I would say that I do think that the Cameroon government's policy of assimilation in relation to the Anglophone regions, of assimilation into the dominant Francophone state, has led to marginalization, particularly in various legal and educational spheres. Also, as Nancy has pointed out, the mechanics of marginalization don't only happen at sort of government level and through government officials. It also happens in everyday life, as those sort of policies get sort of translated into social relations between people. And I think our report has captured that. It has captured various ways in which our research participants experienced different forms of marginalization. And yes, you've added some theory to what we've said, which is great, and that's certainly theories and concepts to take forward as we develop the writings that come out of this report. I mean, just one thing about dialogue. I mean, I think that you know, dialogue is extremely important in getting to resolution of this conflict. And yes, you were right that the nature of governance in Cameroon as a whole is partly responsible for the current conflict in the Anglophone regions. But I do feel that the conflict has its historical roots, and the issues of federalism and secession have arisen previously in the post-independence period. So I do think that the Anglophone conflict can be examined separately from overall question of poor governance in Cameroon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll now open up the floor for questions and answers. But before then, I have my own comments to add before. So I think using my chair's action to talk about, in terms of what is new about this report. For those of us that work on Africa, we do research on Africa, we ask for opportunities where the voices from people at the ground zero, for example, are amplified. And for me, in this report, the project done by Nancy, Gordon, and the team is one that amplifies the voices that are not normally heard. So when issues, you know, sometimes are being discussed at the policy making level, you tend to hear voices of maybe some of the consultants, you know, that maybe do the work from maybe the capital, you know, talking for the people that are on the ground. But in this report, I see that this is one that speaks with the people and not for the people. So for me, this is one that is really interesting as part of, you know, the decolonization agenda in terms of how we study and work on Africa.